Hi, everybody. Today we're going to talk a little bit about how to present a presentation. First of all, you should have something that you're showing in your presentation, whether that's a sketch, a some sort of design, or something that you're doing. And you want to prepare and design your presentation. So distill what it is about your thing that you want to share the most. You want to distill it to your biggest points or themes, outline the design that you're presenting. And it's a really good idea to use your design approach. That's already a baked in way that you have to present things and is already there breaking down your design. So use it to your advantage. Then you want to take the things that you've decided are your big priorities, review those and plan what you're going to do. AKA, you should practice with a partner or yourself. And I do mean talk to yourself like a crazy person in the mirror or by yourself in a room or to somebody else. You need to practice getting those actual words out of your actual mouth. It's one thing to be able to think about what you are going to say over and over again, but it's an entirely different thing to get your mouth used to moving around those words and actually saying them. So you should do that. It also helps you to build in your time management. You should have a timer. I'm going to ask you to keep your presentation within a certain amount of time, and you are going to have to get used to how fast or slow you speak and whether or not you're going to start talking faster when you're nervous. And that might be something that you need to take into account. But either way, you want to know how your pace is and about how much time you're going to be taking up. The other part is providing visuals. Your design may be something that you're going to render. And for this particular set of projects in this class, that is what you're going to be doing. You're going to be showing a rendering, a picture or a digital thing. But you want to keep in mind that if you're going to provide your visuals, you either need to physically bring them printed out, big enough for everyone to see, to have an object that's big enough to see or pass around, or you're going to have a digital presentation. And if you do that, you have to be able to connect something, whether that's HDMI or VGA or whatever the computerized system is that attaches. You need to know what that is ahead of time. And sometimes that means asking. So when you show us an item and a picture, if it's a rendering, it really should communicate these four fundamental things: shape, form, movement, this kind of general idea of what it is the first category. You can draw something, you can collage it, you can make a sculpture, you can make a model. This is kind of the thing. We need to be able to figure out where the audience is, where the shape of the container is, where masking is. If it's a piece of clothing, you want to know the general idea, the shape and scale of the body or the puppet. If you're lighting, it's the general idea of mood or location or sources. This is the same through all areas of design, but you need a general idea of the shape of the thing, right? It's the shape. The next part would be color. Now, this can be a way communicated in a lot of different ways, but as we discussed with color, it's really important that color is visually communicated. You can't just say, well, I'd like it to be kind of tealish. You have to show a swatch of what that is, or you can paint the object, or you can use a collage, or you can cite reference images very specifically. But you do have to point to that color somewhere. Generally, also, your renderings are expected to convey mood, meaning that whether you paint it or shadow it or use reference images that you cite, you give an idea of the mood, the atmosphere, or the vibe of what you want this design to feel like. The next part is scale or context. This is what I mean often also by seeing the container, seeing where legs are, seeing where the audience is, knowing whether you're talking about putting a real person-sized hat on a person, or if you're talking about putting a teeny tiny hat on top of a person. That scale can matter. Often we are looking at scale in comparison to a person, but you can do fully in scale drawings. A reminder that your presentation is to show us your design. It's a time where you show up and sell it. It's a speech or talk in which you introduce a new product, an idea, or piece of work as shown and explained to an audience, like a sales presentation. It's just the tip of the iceberg. You are not expected to show me all of the work you have done. You are not expected to show every decision you have made and every time you've changed your mind. There should be a lot underneath the surface of that water in the iceberg of your idea. but you're showing us the biggest, brightest, best peak of your idea, of your design. You also want to show, if you can, more than tell. Generally, the way that you're going to structure your presentation is an introduction where you tell us about the concept, you explain your choices. This is very much like the design statement. And here it is often better to show us and not directly tell us. I do mean you should explain why you've made those choices, but you don't want to tell us about your choices without showing us them. So what I mean by that is you don't want to just show a sketch and then describe how your sketch is not really accurate to what you want the design to be, and this is how you would change it. If that's the case, you should have some more supplementary images to help us see what you're talking about. You also want to try and focus on conveying the entire story, but not every single moment in the play. Choose the important moments, choose the important things you want to talk about, and focus in on those for your presentation. You're telling us the story through the lens of these moments rather than trying to give us every important thing that happened or every beat that happened. In the end, you're going to close out your presentation. And one of the things I recommend very strongly is an exit strategy. And what I mean by that is, quite simply put, if you're not quite sure how to end that presentation, you think you want to say more or share more, you have something prepared that you just end the conversation with. It could be a summary of kind of your concept or your introduction in the beginning. It could be a practiced thing that you say. It could be, thank you, do you have any questions? If you practice that exit strategy and you get lost in the middle of your presentation, you can get back on track, say a few words of conclusion or a sentence, and then say, thank you, do you have any questions? Or thank you, what do you think? Whatever you want to end that presentation with, if you have that exit strategy kind of memorized and down pat, when you start to panic in the middle of your presentation, you have a very dependable way to end it. The other thing is that when you're building your presentation, you don't want to build a wall of text. You're going to build a wall and make the audience pay for it. You really should not have a wall of text on your slide. There's a bunch of reasons. Text, depending on the contrast, can be hard to see and read. It can be difficult to see because it's too small. Usually an audience also tends to read the text instead of listening to you or watching you while you're presenting. Don't worry, it's natural. It's even worse if I'm speaking slower than you would like me to, or quieter, because it makes it easier for you to tune me out and keep going. To that point, I'm also not really paying attention to you. I'm reading from the screen and not looking up. This limits my eye contact and connection to those I'm trying to explain my vision to. Although it may make me feel more secure and less afraid of messing up, it doesn't help me connect with the audience or convince you that my design is best for the show. Not only is a wall of text faster for you to read in your head than it is for me to speak it aloud, it is also natural and automatic for you to look at it and not me. Like reading captions on a movie, if it's there, you may find yourself only reading the words and not really watching the show. That is probably what you've done here. And by now, you're probably out of sync with what I'm saying, and you're able to read much faster in your head than I ever can out loud. Usually, this is where I ask you to raise your hand physically in class so that we can see that some of you have read ahead and some of you have not. Of course, we're not actually in class at this point, but I think you get the point that I'm trying to make here. It's also just generally unattractive. If you found this slide particularly painful, I think you should just reconsider if you make a block of text on a PowerPoint that you're going to read. And this is why you want your presentation to be different than the physical paperwork you turn in for this project. So how does a presentation really work? Well, you've got actually a bunch of different types of presentations. So you have something that is like an elevator pitch. This basically gets the idea across. It's a teaser. It's supposed to be really fast. And they call it an elevator pitch because it's the idea of you get in the elevator on the first floor with someone super famous and you just throw a pitch of an idea that you think is perfect and you have to get it to them before they get off on their floor. And that's an elevator pitch. A short presentation is kind of the length of things we're going to be doing in this class. And it's something that you give to a knowledgeable group. Presentation is usually knowledge you give to a group that doesn't already have context. So you have to put a lot of things in context for them. An in-depth discussion is usually where you're providing knowledge and context with multiple participants. So you're not just the only person giving that context and that knowledge, but everybody's bringing that to the table. So design conversations, production meetings, those are really in-depth discussions. And a lecture is where we're providing knowledge and context didactically, AKA, I'm just telling it to you. That's what we're experiencing here. For a group presentation, particularly in this class, not everyone has to talk as much, but everyone does have to talk. It means you can communicate as a group and a whole unit and figure out what way you would like to present and in what fashion you would like to present. So it can be linear or it can be topic based. And what I mean by that is linear, as in you can chronologically go through the entire show and explain scenic lighting and costumes or sound for all of those pieces. Or you can do it topic based, like scenic can go first, then lighting can go first, then costumes, and sound. And quite often we do a lot of things topic based in a lot of our meetings, but that doesn't mean that's how you have to present it. In case you're wondering, the average amount of time for these presentations, the elevator pitch is usually something between 30 seconds and 2 minutes, very short. A short presentation is between 3 and 8 minutes. A full presentation, if someone says, hey, I'd like you to give a presentation on that, they usually mean between 10 and 15 minutes. If someone presents their portfolio, if someone presents for a job interview, if someone presents like something like that, you generally do ask how long you want that presentation to be, but it's often between 10 and 15 minutes. An in-depth discussion usually ranges for between 15 and 30 minutes. That's often why we schedule our production meetings for between 30 minutes to an hour, because we need to spend some time to ramp up and cover some business before we get into that discussion. We have our discussion and then we have some time to wrap up. A lecture is usually between 30 and 50 minutes. If it gets too much longer than that, it gets real hard to kind of pay attention for most people, even when you're delivering information didactically. Once you get over about 10 minutes, you usually plan to fill only about 75% of any presentation. The rest should be left for questions or responses or allow you to adapt to how your audience is responding to your lecture or your discussion or your presentation. So you also want to lay out your landmarks. Don't write a speech that you memorize. Now, if you can memorize a speech and you're more comfortable with that because you have a performance background, go for it. It's just not all that normal for people who don't have extensive acting experience to be able to memorize a whole speech and actually sound natural when they deliver it. I would say that that's definitely a skill. And otherwise, if you lay out your landmarks and what you're going to discuss, it sounds a lot more natural in between each one of those items as you're talking. The other part is you want to work on giving and receiving productive feedback. Our goal, you have to remember, is to make better work. So we need to be respectful toward others, and also open feedback is important. I would say the number one thing for those critiquing other people and for the artist taking critique is to always consider being a little less responsive, meaning just try not to be defensive about things. Things are given with good intent and give with good intent. Always, if at all possible, assume good intent from the person you are getting it from. And remember that their opinions are just their opinions. If they take something the wrong way, you shouldn't think of that as a hugely negative thing. You should think of it as an opportunity to see how your point could be interpreted. So when you're giving a critique, try and keep your responses to statements of meaning. Tell them what you see, what you heard, what your impulses were, and what you got from it. As an artist, you should be looking to seek responses, not just validation. Meaning for both of these sides, don't ask, do you think it's cool? And don't say, oh, I think that's cool. Can you say that occasionally? Yes. Is it not? Is it a very useful piece of response? No. Tell them what's useful about it. Tell them Oh, I really feel that's cool. I really feel like it is realistic and makes me feel like I'm there in the moment. That gives them a response to what they've designed rather than, oh, I just think it's cool. Now, if your response is, man, I think that's really cool, it's eye catching and sparkly, and I just can't stop looking at it, that's also good to hear, but only if that's a thing that they're supposed to be looking at. If an artist gets that response from a background dancer's clothing, maybe they need to change the background dancer's clothing so it doesn't overpower the main character. So when you're critiquing, judgment is natural, but harshness isn't necessary. We're in the room judging whether something is um, functional for the show or accurate or successful, but that doesn't mean that we need to be harsh and unnecessary about some of those judgments, right? So the artist is asking for what they need, what you see, and what you're experiencing in that moment. If something bothers you because it's not your favorite color or you think it's dirty or subpar, that's not something to bring into that conversation. If it's not the question that's asked, it's it could be beyond the scope of that critique. Even when you have positive comments, consider the utility of it. This is where I'm talking about, don't just call it, say it's cool, say why it's cool. A critique is not personal. It's about the work and the effectiveness of telling a story. So when you keep if your positive comments are too shallow, they also can't learn from what they're doing correctly. It is important to look at the world where clarity is kindness. Be direct. It doesn't have to be fancy. You can also be direct without being cruel, but being clear is very important. Meaning, if something isn't working, we should talk about and dissect why it's not working, not because we're trying to be mean about it, but because we're trying to figure out what the perception is. So, as an audience member, if my perception is, well, it feels very cold, and the rest of the audience is also having that response, but that wasn't the artist's intent, they want to know why. So, we try and figure that out together. It doesn't mean we're cutting apart what they're doing and saying what we think they should have done, but only responding with, instead of saying, well, I wouldn't have painted the walls blue like that. You want to respond with something like, I think the cool tone on the wall is really giving me that sense of coolness, but it might just be because it's a cool wall and a cool carpet and a cool bed and a cool art piece on the wall. And in this context, I'm actually using cool and versus warm, not just cool, cool. I realized I used cool too many times in that sentence. And, it's just not cool. Also, my jokes don't land as well. I'm just audio, but whatever. Moving on. The intention of the style of the work is often very personal, and you want to talk about more than just one thing. You want to, again, focus on saying what you observed. And if you have an opinion that feels completely out of left field, you can always say something like, I have an opinion about blank. Would you like to hear it? And this offers somebody to have consent for something. So I have an opinion on how you could do that better. Would you like to hear it? I have an opinion on when you are holding that meeting. Would you like to hear it? Maybe the answer is no. Maybe the answer is we've tried every other time slot, nothing else works. I don't want your opinion. We went over the schedule for 5 years. It's not happening. We're not changing it. Sometimes people don't want your opinion. Sometimes they can say no. I'm going to point out that you're paying me to tell you my opinion. So generally, people just get mine in like the responses to their projects, even if they don't say yes to them in class. But that's also because when registering for this class, you said you wanted my opinion. So here we are. You also, as an artist, you want to let someone completely finish before responding. And part of that is because some misunderstandings or seeing something you didn't intend is not a failure on your part or their part, but it might be just something you need to look at as requiring revision. Looking at it as taking an opportunity that someone misunderstanding what you did is important to know because we all have different standards. We all have different histories that we're drawing from. Some people see red as hunger, some people see red as passion. And given the different situations that it could come up in, maybe it's a different response. So you want to let somebody finish and you want to have a willing suspension of your disbelief that you are right and they are wrong. Look, we all think we're right and they're wrong. If we didn't think we were right and other people were wrong, then they wouldn't be our opinions. They're our opinions. But when you go into the artistic process, you want to take a moment to willingly suspend your disbelief. Assume that they are there, giving you air and the time of day to help you and to make a better product together, and listen. You don't always have to do everything other people say, but listen to what their opinions are. Listen to the problem that they see and the observation that they're having. And that's what you should take away. Not necessarily the way they told you how to fix it, but listening to what they interpreted will get you more information. So as a follow-up, remember that you can always follow up with me if you have any questions or if you need more information or feedback about any presentation or project. For project presentations like the ones we do in design meetings or prelims, as a professional, remember to keep it short. In your class projects, they're small and you have very, very little time. But when you're in a design or a production meeting, think about how many people have to present and how that's going to be divided up. So you want to present relative information, but not necessarily all the information. Whether it's in a final project presentation for this class or an actual design presentation, prelim presentation, you want to look at how many people are speaking and divide your time accordingly. So what I mean by that is in your final presentation, it's modeled after a design presentation for first rehearsal. So you can present together or separate, but you should generally be taking about the same amount of time, or at least devoting about the same amount of time to each design section. You can stylize your presentation however you like, though. The last one I'll say is that when you're presenting in a design meeting with other people, you also want to do that same kind of thing. Quite often, the first person to go has a lot of setup to do, and they take a little bit more time than everybody else. But you want to be careful that you're not taking time away from everybody else to be able to get the work they need to get done. I say that specifically as a scenic designer because I often present first, and I need to keep my design presentation at 10 minutes or 15 minutes, depending on what kind of format we're in. But I need to keep it short so that everybody has time to talk. And if I run too long, then somebody doesn't get to talk. So I do want us to have efficient, short presentations and be able to ask questions. So that's where practicing comes into account. All right, that's it. Thank you, everybody. And I hope this gives you a good head start into how you're going to be presenting your final projects.